750,000 pounds of fish were reeled in on the Illinois River from November 27th.
50 years ago, the Asian carp were brought into America on purpose, welcomed as living filters to scrub algae out of ponds. But today, the very people who once wanted them are hunting them by the tons, because those helpful little cleaners didn't stay put. They exploded until they became one of the most destructive invasions in American history, unstoppable for half a century. Now, in the one stretch of the Illinois River, guarding the way into the Great Lakes, something has finally started driving them back. And it isn't the answer the headlines reach for, not a bigger predator, not a monster from the deep, but something far more unexpected. But to understand what finally beat them, you first have to understand how unstoppable these fish were. The carp are vanishing. Asian carp aren't a single fish, but 4 related species: bighead, silver, black, and grass. And together, they are built to take over. They can grow past 4 feet long and weigh more than 100 pounds. And on top of that sheer size, they breed at a speed that's hard to picture, producing young by the millions. Everything about them is tuned to spread. They were brought into the United States back in the 1970s for a simple job, cleaning algae out of fish farms and treatment ponds. But they didn't stay where they were put. Within about 10 years, they had escaped into the wild, and from there, they poured into the great rivers of the American interior, spreading through the Mississippi and the river systems branching off it, including the Illinois. And once they were loose, they did something almost no invasive species ever managed, because they didn't just survive in these new waters, they took them over completely. The way they did it was by attacking the food supply itself. Silver and bighead carp feed on plankton, the tiny drifting plants and animals that sit at the very bottom of the river's food chain. And because nearly every other fish depends on that plankton, either by eating it directly or by eating the smaller creatures that do. Whoever controls the plankton controls the river. The carp strip it out of the water in staggering amounts, quietly starving the native fish from below. And they do it in overwhelming numbers. In some stretches of the Illinois River, Asian carp came to make up 60 to 70% of every living thing in the water. And that isn't 60% of the fish. It's 60% of the total mass of living things in the river. One invader crowding out almost everything that actually belonged there. For half a century, nothing slowed them down. No native predator could eat them fast enough to matter, and no barrier held them back for long. They only ever did one thing: spread, pushing further up the rivers year after year and looking utterly impossible to stop. And that is what makes what's happening now so hard to believe. Because in the northern stretch of the Illinois River, the part that runs closest to Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes beyond it, the Asian carp are finally falling back. Their numbers there have been driven down, and in some places the population has collapsed outright. After 50 years of nothing but winning, a fish that beat everything the river could throw at it is, at last, losing ground. Which raises the one question everyone wants answered. What could possibly be beating a fish this unstoppable? The obvious guess is that something is finally eating them, some predator that found a way to do what nothing else could. And that is exactly where the story takes its strangest turn. The monster everyone blames. Search online for what's killing the Asian carp, and one answer comes up over and over, and it's a dramatic one. The way most people tell it, the carp are being hunted down by a monster. Its name is the Alligator Gar, and it looks like something that swam straight out of the age of the dinosaurs, because in a sense, it did. The Alligator Gar is one of the oldest fish in North America, a living relic with a body covered in hard, interlocking scales, a long snout lined with rows of sharp teeth, and a size that's genuinely hard to believe. The biggest of them stretch past 8 feet and weigh over 300 pounds. It is, by any measure, A real river monster, a prehistoric giant still swimming in American waters today. And here's the part that makes the story irresistible. For most of the last century, people hated the alligator gar, seeing it as a threat to the fish they wanted to catch, so they hunted it down without mercy until it disappeared from much of the territory it once ruled. In Illinois, it was declared locally extinct in 1994, wiped out of the state completely. But the story didn't end there. Even though the gar was gone from Illinois, it still survived in other parts of the country, and wildlife agencies were able to take fish from those surviving populations, raise them, and deliberately release them back into Illinois waters, bringing an ancient apex predator back from local extinction. You can see why the story almost tells itself. A fearsome native giant, wiped out and then brought back, returning just in time to hunt down the invaders wrecking its home river. It's a perfect revenge tale, and across the internet, that's exactly how it gets told. The resurrected prehistoric predator is the reason the carp are disappearing. It's a great story, but there's one problem with it. The people who actually brought the alligator gar back say it isn't true. Why the monster isn't the answer. The people who brought the alligator gar back are the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the state agency in charge of the program, and they've been remarkably blunt about it. The GR, they say, were never released to fight Asian carp. They were brought back for a completely different reason, to restore a native species that had been wiped out of the state, and to repair a small piece of an ecosystem that people had damaged decades earlier. Using them as the hero of a carp fighting story, the agency says, gets the facts wrong. And it's not just a matter of intentions, because when you look at what an alligator gar can actually do, it becomes clear the monster was never capable of the job in the first place. The first problem is size, and specifically, the size of the gar's mouth. As fearsome as these fish look, there's a hard limit on what they can swallow, and even a large alligator gar prefers prey only around 8 to 12 inches long. That would be fine if carp stayed small, but they don't. Young carp grow extraordinarily fast, and within just a few months of being born, they shoot straight past the size a gar can handle. So there's only a brief window, very early in a carp's life, when a gar could eat it at all. After that, the carp is simply too big to fit in the monster's mouth. But size isn't even the biggest obstacle. The second problem is harder to get around, and it comes down to raw numbers. Asian carp in these rivers aren't counted the way you'd count normal fish. In the worst hit stretches, they're measured in tons per mile of river, an almost unimaginable wall of fish. Against that, the number of gar actually released is tiny, just a few thousand fish scattered across an enormous river system. As the state's own fisheries experts put it, it's a numbers game, and there will never be enough alligator gar out there to meaningfully push back a carp population that size. So the monster, however satisfying, isn't the answer. A gar might snap up the occasional young carp, but it can't touch the adults, and there are nowhere near enough of them to matter. The prehistoric predator was never going to win this war, which means the thing actually driving the carp back has to be something else entirely. Something far less obvious than a giant fish, and far more surprising. The real predator. The real predator isn't a fish, or any kind of animal at all. The thing driving the Asian carp out of the northern Illinois River is humans. For years, wildlife agencies and commercial fishing crews have been fighting an all-out war on the carp, on a scale that's hard to grasp. In the past 15 years alone, they have pulled 50 million pounds of invasive carp out of the Illinois River. To put that in perspective, 50 million pounds is roughly the weight of 5,000 elephants, hauled out of a single river, one net at a time. No predator in nature could ever eat that many fish, but a coordinated human effort could and did. And there's a clear reason it's happening right here. The removal is concentrated on the northern stretch of the river, within about 50 miles of Lake Michigan. And that spot is chosen on purpose because this is the last stretch of water standing between the Carp and the Great Lakes. If the Carp reach Lake Michigan, they open the door to a whole chain of connected lakes and a fishing industry worth billions of dollars. And they could tear it apart the same way they tore apart the rivers. So this stretch became the front line, where the plan is to hit the adult carp hard, killing them before they can breed and cutting off their push toward the lake. But netting them by the ton isn't the only weapon in the fight. That commercial netting, boats dragging huge nets through the water and hauling out carp by the boatload, is the backbone of the effort. Behind it sits something stranger, an underwater electric barrier built across the river about 37 miles from Lake Michigan. It fills the water with an electric field that fish refuse to swim through, a literal electric wall meant to turn back any carp that get that far upstream. And there's a third front in this war, aimed not at the fish, but at people, because officials have been working to turn the carp into food, giving the fish a new name and building a market for eating it, so that everyday appetite for a meal becomes one more thing thinning their numbers. Put it all together, and the picture is clear. The thing beating this unstoppable fish isn't a monster from the deep. It's nets, boats, electricity, and a marketing campaign, an entire human system built to do what no natural predator could. But humans are not the only enemy the Asian carp are facing. The invader that beat itself. The carp's second enemy is one they created entirely on their own, and it comes down to a simple, brutal fact of nature. A population can only grow as large as its food supply allows, and the Asian carp, in their runaway success, blew straight past that limit. Think back to how dominant they became. 60 to 70% of all the living matter in some stretches of the river. That sounds like total victory, and for a while it was. But all those millions of carp had to eat, and what they eat is plankton, the tiny drifting life at the base of the food web. When a population gets that enormous, it starts eating its own food supply faster than that food can grow back. The carp were essentially eating the river empty, and once the plankton crashed, there wasn't enough left to feed the swarm they'd built, so the carp themselves began to starve. And a starving population quietly falls apart. When fish don't get enough food, they grow more slowly and produce fewer young, and fewer of those young survive. So in the hardest hit areas, the carp numbers just start to drop. In some stretches, the carp have declined, not because anyone removed them, but because they became too successful for their own good, an invader that won so completely it ran out of anything left to win. It's one of the strange, self-correcting cruelties of nature that the very thing that made the carp unstoppable, their sheer overwhelming numbers, became the thing that turned on them. And there's one more piece to the picture, smaller but real, and it involves the native fish, after all, just not in the way the monster story claimed. Native species like largemouth bass, channel catfish, and bluegill can't do anything to a full-grown carp, but they will happily eat carp at the very start of life, when the carp are newly born and tiny, no bigger than the other small prey these fish swallow every day. Even young gar do this. It doesn't stop the invasion on its own, but every larva eaten is one less carp that ever grows big enough to become a problem. A small, constant drag on the population working alongside everything else. So the real answer to what's beating the Asian carp turns out to have three parts, and not one of them is a river monster. It's the massive human removal effort. It's the carp starving themselves out after growing too numerous, and it's native fish quietly picking off the young. Are they really vanishing? There's one honest question left to answer, and it's the one the whole story hangs on. Are the Asian carp actually vanishing? And the truthful answer is, not entirely, and not everywhere. It would be easy to tell you the carp are beaten, that this invasion is over, but that isn't what's happening. Across the wider Mississippi Basin and through much of the Illinois River, the carp are still there in enormous numbers, still doing damage, still a serious problem. Nobody has wiped them out, and no one seriously claims they have. What's actually true is more specific, and in its own way, more important. In the northern stretch of the river, the part that guards the way to Lake Michigan, the combination of relentless removal and the carp's own local collapses has genuinely driven their numbers down, and in places crashed them. That's where the vanishing is real. And that specific stretch is exactly the one that matters most, because it's the gate to the Great Lakes. Holding the carp back there is the difference between an invasion that stays trapped in the river system and one that breaks into an entirely new chain of lakes worth billions. So the win is narrow, but it's the most valuable ground on the whole map. It's also a win that never really ends. The moment the pressure lets up, the carp come surging back, breeding as fast as ever, so keeping them out means holding the line forever, backed by more than 24 agencies and crews working the water constantly. So when you hear that the Asian carp are vanishing, the truth is stranger than the headline. They're being beaten back, in the one place it matters most, by a mix of human effort and their own success turning against them. For 50 years, the Asian carp beat everything the rivers could throw at them. In the end, the predator everyone was hunting for turned out to be two things no one expected: humans and the carp themselves. Beaten back by human effort, and by a fish so successful it starved out its own kind.